Welcome everyone to the Tiny Fit Diva podcast. I'm so happy to have you today. I'm Kylene, Terhune, your host and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to Angie Alt. And welcome, Angie. I'm so glad you're on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation.
For everyone who doesn't know who you are, I'm going to give a short little bio. Angie is a full-time health coach, author of the book, The Alternative Autoimmune Cookbook, Eating for All Phases of the Paleo Autoimmune Protocol. She is a teacher and co-founder of the Autoimmune Protocol Coaching Certification. And of course, she is an autoimmune warrior herself. She also founded the SAD to AIP in 6 online coaching program to help those wanting to go through the AIP diet get support and guidance through the process. So I actually met Angie through the AIP coaching certification program. She and Nikki Truscott and Sarah Valentine run that program together, and it was super helpful and informative to me. And so I reached out and asked if she would be on the podcast, and she was gracious enough to join us today. And I'm really excited to talk to you because working with autoimmune clients, they have a lot of questions.
Yep.
And
no end.
Yeah. And the AIP protocol is tough. It is really intense. You know, people go on Whole30 a lot, and this is like Whole30 on steroids.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So it's a little difficult to incorporate, but it's so super effective that we do like to use it with a lot of people.
Yep.
And so we'll get into some of those general questions a little bit later, but can you share your personal story of healing and your process of discovering that you had some autoimmune conditions and how you ended up where you are now, helping everyone through the process?
Yeah. So, my story started, I guess it'll be in a few weeks here, it'll be about 18 years ago.
Wow.
So, when my daughter was born, following her birth, I started to notice some changes to my skin. And back then you didn't really get online. You didn't do like Dr. Google to figure out what was wrong. But I went and researched in a medical encyclopedia, and I found a disorder called lichen sclerosis. It's a skin disorder that affects the genitals of women and sometimes men too. It was really considered at that time, and I think still largely is, a disease that only affects postmenopausal women. And it was considered very rare. But I thought that might be what was wrong. And I went and saw my obstetrician gynecologist who had delivered my daughter. And I said, I think I'm dealing with this. And he did an exam and he said, yeah, you're right. That's what's wrong. And he gave me a steroid cream and sent me on my way. He didn't explain to me that it was an autoimmune disease, which was a very crucial and important piece of information, because once you have one autoimmune disease, you are at risk to develop more. And there are things you can do to try to mitigate that risk. Granted, I wasn't aware of those things at that time, but knowing that it was an autoimmune disease could have been valuable to me as I started to have other issues later in my life. I could have said to my doctors, hey, I have an autoimmune disease already. Could I be experiencing more autoimmune symptoms? But so, I kind of just blundered along. I was a brand new mom in my early 20s. I was a single mom. So I was just like basically zombieing my way through everything and, just doing my best to kind of manage things. And I started to develop some additional symptoms. And now looking back, I realized that they were probably the beginnings of celiac disease. And I went, of course I had a nurse practitioner as my primary care doctor at that time. And I went and saw her and she said, oh, it's just IBS. And you're probably like stressed. That was still when we thought IBS was just basically like stress, like it was in your head, you were too anxious. She was like, oh, it's just IBS, like, just take some over the counter stuff and, it'll be fine. And she kind of dismissed it. Really interestingly, many people with celiac disease get dismissed in the beginning as having just IBS. That's a very common misdiagnosis for celiac disease. So, Again, I just kind of tried to blunder through, and eventually I met my husband, and he works in international development. So we moved overseas. We moved to West Africa. And while I was in West Africa, I started to basically, my autoimmunity kind of went into full force. It was like kerosene on the fire. I was in a really challenging new environment. I was exposed to a lot of things. It's a tough environment in terms of bacterial and parasitic infections. I had to have a ton of vaccines to safely live in that area, which it was the right thing to do, to be vaccinated against those very serious and deadly diseases. But it was a lot for my autoimmune body. And I didn't really understand those risks. And it was just, it was a very big international move and a big cultural transition. So I was under a lot of stress. And those factors, I think, just kind of led to this, big collapse almost, And I started to experience some very serious, consequences of untreated celiac disease, basically. I also had been dealing pretty much my whole, post-menstruating life with issues with my period. And my husband and I had been struggling with infertility for a few years by that point, secondary infertility. And that kind of came to a head at the same time. So I went through a series of 3 medical evacuations while living in West Africa because of the things I was going through. And we were just in an area with really, really limited medical infrastructure, and they just couldn't really deal with, what I was experiencing. If you think about it, it's very hard, even in the United States, to get accurate diagnosis and help for autoimmune disease. So imagine what happens in a developing country. It was just really tough for them to try to help me and navigate it. So eventually, the last evacuation, I was taken to the Tropical Diseases Hospital in Brussels, Belgium. And I was told that they thought that I had potentially had cerebral malaria, but I was coming out of it, and everything would be okay, but I should probably go home and recover. And so at that point, I told my husband, I don't know what is wrong, but I need to go back to the US and just try to figure out what is wrong and get help. And basically, I made it my full-time job once I arrived back in the States to, pursue medical help and try to figure out what was wrong. And I still got turned away. It was still another probably 9 months. I saw a lot of doctors. A lot of them told me I was just too stressed of a person. I was too anxious. I was causing my weight loss by being such an anxious person, that I should eat all the cookies, pizza, pasta, and candy I wanted, drink milkshakes, that would all help me put weight on, I started to have, friends and family members who insinuated I had an eating disorder, which was very disheartening and very painful to go through because I was so scared and struggling with what was wrong. I had doctors suggesting that maybe I had lymphoma, which was very frightening. So we were just going through this crazy process of elimination, basically, or even just trying to get doctors to kind of get on board with me at all. Eventually, in the end, I was seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist, actually, at that time, who suggested that I possibly had PTSD and that maybe we could consider admitting myself to a mental health facility for 3 or 4 days and trying to calm down, basically. But I was a wreck. I had a lot of physical problems going on. I did have a lot of mental and emotional health problems by that point because, we don't realize that all those nutrients that we're absorbing with our food are so important to that stability, but they really are. And with a damaged small intestine, I was really malnourished. So I was kind of struggling with that decision, and I randomly got a referral to a GI doctor. And the GI doctor told me that she thought that I might have ulcers, but she wanted to run this other blood test. And the other blood test was for gluten antibodies. And obviously my antibodies were very, very high. So she immediately ordered an endoscopy. And when I woke up from the endoscopy, she came in and said, you have celiac disease.
Mm.
And that was a crazy moment. You know, it's still hard for me to talk about it without getting emotional, because it was like suddenly at least a decade, about 11 years of my life and struggling, just like in 10 seconds, she gave me the answer.
Wow.
So after that, I started a gluten-free diet. But it wasn't really enough to heal me in that state. You know, by that point, I had diagnosed endometriosis, diagnosed lichen sclerosis, and diagnosed celiac disease. And I was just really worn down and really malnourished. You know, I weighed about 94 pounds. It was a just bad spot to be in. And just a typical gluten-free diet wasn't enough to heal. So I kind of in desperation started looking for more answers, and I reached out to some friends, and one of my friends talked to a friend of hers who wrote me and said that I should look into something called lectins. And I mean, this was back in like early 2012. I mean, there was barely any information out there on this idea, but I looked it up and I found Rob Wolf, and I found his book. And, you know, Rob had like a couple pages or something, maybe a couple sentences in his book that were like, oh, P.S., people with autoimmune disease, you should probably like take this like a couple steps further. And I was like, what? Okay. So I went paleo right away. But within the week, I started, you know, doing some more searches, and I found Sarah Ballantyne's website, The Paleo Mom. And Sarah was just beginning to kind of do some more research about the autoimmune protocol and trying to give a little bit more information and guidance to that. And she was starting to experiment with it on herself for her own autoimmune diseases. And I thought, well, I have 3 autoimmune diseases. It seems like this protocol is probably what I need to do. So I cold turkeyed it overnight and started. And 3 days later, I took the last Xanax that I've ever taken.
Wow.
So it was huge. Yeah, it was huge. 6 weeks later, my gluten antibodies had dropped by half. 6 months later, it was like having a new body. And a year later, I changed everything to tell other people how to do this.
That's amazing. Wow. Wow. That is so incredible. What a journey. And man, I'm sure you look back in frustration at the first 10 years where it was just such an effort to get answers, but what a journey you had to go through in order to be able to do what you do now.
Yeah. You know, that it absolutely sucks when we're deep in it, but if you're there, try to have hope that you're learning something that's going to be valuable on the other side.
Yeah. So I have so many questions to say, son. I was like writing down all this stuff while you were while you were talking, but just things I think people might ask when they hear your story. So you really started noticing changes after the birth of your daughter. So is that a common time that people are going to begin experiencing more of the symptoms? Because we know that really autoimmunity doesn't show up overnight. It's a process. But in terms of feeling the symptoms and all of a sudden recognizing that there's a problem, is postpartum a common thing for people?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, it definitely is. So we ladies are at a much higher risk for developing autoimmune disease as it is. And those kind of big hormonal shifts that women experience throughout their lives, so 1 being puberty, 2 being pregnancy and postpartum, and 3 being menopause, those are kind of like danger zones basically for people who are kind of predisposed to autoimmunity. Those can be times when it can really be triggered. It probably has a lot to do with our really complex hormonal system. That's definitely a time. And you're right. Looking back on it, I realized that I probably did have some kind of like low level symptoms. I was kind of like maybe on that autoimmune spectrum, but it wasn't really like full blown and crazy yet, you know. But then following pregnancy, obviously all my hormones changed after giving birth. And also I had a C-section. And that, disrupts your gut microbiota and everything else. It's like a big thing to have to recover from. You have to, be on antibiotics following that surgery, all those things. And I think, all of that was probably the trigger.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so much stress on your body, and like you said,
Yeah.
so much change in just your
Yeah.
gut bacteria and everything. That's crazy. So that makes sense. So you basically though came to your doctor and said, "I think I have this." Good for you, first of all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you were dismissed by the doctor, which is very common in terms of it takes a long time for a lot of people to get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, even now that it's becoming
Yeah.
more and more common. But what do you think? I'm sure you're familiar with all the studies where your antibodies are present for like up to 14, 15 years prior to developing any of the symptoms. And so, what in terms of prevention, I mean, do you just think if you see any mild symptoms, go ahead and get your antibodies tested? Like, what do you tell people? Because it's so, at that phase, I would think preventable. You can catch it early enough. What would you say to people in terms of, listening to your body and being really careful about that?
Yeah, I try to be a little bit careful with the kind of the idea of prevention, because I do think that it can leave some people in kind of a position where they're feeling really guilty, like maybe I didn't do enough.
Sure.
Soon enough. So I want to make sure that people get the message, like, you didn't cause this. It's not your fault that it happens. But sure, if you recognize symptoms and you start to do a little research and you go like, oh, these are very familiar Hashimoto symptoms, or these are very familiar celiac symptoms, maybe I should go talk to my doctor. Yeah, go in there with that idea, go in there empowered and say, hey, could I have this? And also pay attention to your risk factors. If you have family members who have autoimmune diseases, even if it's not the one you're suspecting, just the fact that they have autoimmune disease could raise your risk, and let your doctor know that information. And ask for the testing and see if you can take some steps from there. Now, I don't think that in the absence of confirmation, you should just kind of definitely go on the autoimmune protocol or something similar. I think that it is a challenging protocol, and it's definitely meant to be therapeutic in nature. It's supposed to help you manage like a full-blown disease, be part of the tools you could use. But you could maybe make some more simple, lower level changes, work on eating better, work on focusing on nutrient dense foods, try to get more sleep, those kinds of things,
Yeah, absolutely, because it is incredibly hard. So let's talk about that for the people that actually don't know what the AIP protocol is. Can you just give the rundown of what the diet includes?
So the autoimmune protocol is a diet and lifestyle that's basically designed to help folks who have autoimmune diseases hopefully manage their disease. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be just that alone is going to work. For a lot of people, you need a combination of medication, conventional approaches, and dietary and lifestyle approaches. What's important is that you find all the tools to give you your highest wellness, that you're not failing if you have to combine things. So on the dietary side, we focus on eliminating a few foods that can be kind of really inflammatory, very disruptive to the hormonal system, those kinds of things. And it's kind of focused on helping basically heal your gut and calm your immune system. So we remove all grains, we remove all legumes, we remove all dairy, we remove eggs, nuts and seeds, and the nuts and seeds includes chocolate and coffee. I know that's very sad for everybody, and all the nightshade vegetables. So that's things like tomatoes, potatoes, hot and sweet peppers, eggplants, things like that. And then we focus, it's not just about elimination. We focus on also adding really nutrient dense foods. So things like bone broth, organ meats, fish and shellfish, fermented foods to help restore that gut microbiome, foods like that, and like a wide variety of vegetables. It's a myth that this is like a meat-heavy diet. Some protein is important to the healing process, but you should be eating more vegetables than a vegetarian.
I like that. More vegetables than a vegetarian, because let's be honest,
right?
Not all vegetarians eat that many vegetables.
Right. So yeah, that's kind of the dietary side. The lifestyle side is, putting some effort in refining, your approach to things like sleep, stress management, movement, and also connection to nature and other people. Those things can be powerful in kind of taking you from a little bit of healing to a lot of healing.
Yeah, we are. I think we have a tendency in our culture to underestimate the power, whether positive or negative, that stress has.
Yeah.
And there's certainly a level where it is a negative thing in our lives, and just the little tiniest things, like you just mentioned, like getting out in nature, can make a huge difference on your ability to stay calm and to heal. And so when you were in your when you finally found the AIP diet and you went full in, and you had 3 diagnoses at that point, is that correct? Yeah. So you were talking about the changes that you saw within a few days, within a few months, within a year. How long were you actually on the full AIP protocol? Because I know really the goal with a lot of people is to focus on the reintroduction period, where you can get back to as many foods with as much nutrient variety as possible. So how long were you actually on the strict AIP?
Yeah. So, for everybody, the baseline is kind of 30 days. That gives you an optimal chance to kind of reset things and make the process of reintroduction more clear. When the goal there is to have enough symptom improvement that as you start to reintroduce foods, the reappearance of any symptoms gives you a clue that maybe you're not ready for that food, or it doesn't work for you maybe long term. So 30 days is kind of the minimum for everybody. The reality is that most people need about 60 to 90 days. And sometimes folks go beyond 90 days, and that could be for a variety of reasons. For me, it was because I started to uncover some additional issues that were kind of underlying that needed treatment, and diet alone wasn't going to address those things. It was things like, I had small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, SIBO, that needed to be treated, that can't be treated with diet alone. I had some nutrient deficiencies that needed supplementation. There was just a variety of issues that I kind of needed to focus on, and diet alone wasn't going to address that. But I knew that staying in the elimination phase for a little bit more extended period would, 1, help me focus on nutrient density, and 2, it would help to not basically muddy the waters about what was working and what wasn't working. If you're kind of basically conducting a big science experiment on yourself, and a good scientist limits variables. So I tried to kind of limit that until I was kind of out of that process and ready to start reintroducing food. So it was about a year.
That makes sense, because I know it just, when you go through the elimination phase, whether it's food sensitivities or AIP or whatever it is, it's very overwhelming to start paying attention to bringing the foods back in. So when you have other stuff going on that you're trying to focus on, just like you said, take that variable out, take that stressor away. Right. Don't do it until you're ready.
Right.
But then the other part of encouragement for people is it's not forever.
Yep.
The whole goal is to bring those foods back in as much as possible. So try to remember that as they're going through. So I did want to ask you some questions about this, because like we said, it is tough. It's a big change for a lot of people. So what do you say to people that are, just finding out about this, that are kind of like you, were like, okay, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to try this, but it's really overwhelming? How do you encourage people to take that first step and just jump in?
Yeah. So there's basically 2 methods of doing this. There's either cold turkey, or there's slow and steady. So slow and steady is like kind of coming at this in a very gentle process, where you're maybe eliminating 1 or 2 foods a week or every few days, depending on kind of your tolerance. You might even go slower than that. For some people, it's maybe every few months. And just slowly adjusting your diet towards the full elimination protocol. That is probably best suited to people who are feeling maybe overwhelmed about cooking a lot of their food. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed about kind of adjusting their budget to put a big focus on healthy foods. Maybe they're really busy. Maybe, they've got like a lot of little ones to run after. Maybe they've got a very demanding job, things like that, to just make it doable and sustainable. Ultimately, that's the goal. You have to be able to sustain it to see the benefits. So if going slowly into it helps you get there, that's totally fine. Cold turkey is what I did at the time. Cold turkey, usually, this is overnight, basically you're switching, or maybe over a weekend, you're basically switching into this process. And it works really well for people who are very, very highly motivated. I was very, very ill, and that was very motivational. Basically my doctor was telling me that if I lost 1 more pound, she was going to hospitalize me, and we were going to have to try some other methods to try to put weight on me. I was really worried about that. I had started having like almost anaphylaxis level reactions to some of the foods I was consuming. That wasn't like sustainable. So if you're really, really motivated, that could maybe work. Also, I had a lot of experience with cooking and cooking from scratch. In part, living in West Africa right prior really helped.
You kind of had to, yeah.
Yeah, I had to. There was no way around it. So I felt comfortable navigating the kitchen and handling all of that. So that was really helpful. And I just have 1 young daughter. So, and at the time she was already 12. So I didn't feel a lot of pressure about how to help my family adjust, or whether or not they would be able to adjust. So, those are kind of some tips to help you evaluate whether or not one style or the other is better for you. But yeah, it take it slow. The reality is that most folks, probably I'd say at least 85% of folks, need to do the slow and steady.
Sure.
There's no shame in that.
What about, you're talking, so I think really to do it at all, you have to be highly motivated. I mean, to even
that's true.
That's true. It, right?
That's true.
Whether you have to take it in steps or not, if you're going to commit to it, there's got to be some really strong internal pressure, right? So what about people who are like, I really think that this would help me, but I know so many autoimmune clients have these days where they are just in so much pain that they're in bed.
Yeah.
And so the concept of, going shopping for healthy foods or cooking dinner for themselves, that in itself is overwhelming, and they just can't seem to get past that first step. What kind of encouragement do you have for them? Is it more about getting their family on board to support them through that initial phase? Like what sort of steps would you encourage them to take to make it work?
You might want to take it even slower in that case. So you might want to go like, maybe I'm going to start with just going gluten-free, and I'm going to see how I start to feel just from taking that step. And then maybe what I'm going to do is go dairy-free and see if that makes an impact. And if that works, maybe I'll go sugar-free and I'll add that, or I'll kind of focus on that third bit. And then at the same time as going really slowly with the process so that it's a little easier to kind of make the transition. Reach out to your family and friends and get a support network in place. See if you can find somebody who's maybe willing to come over and make you a big pot of soup, and pour it into jars and freeze it so you can just reheat it. See if you've got a friend that's willing to sit down with you and do a little research and plan a menu, and see if you've got a friend or a family member who will literally just be your cheerleader, like somebody who will text you every morning and say, I know you feel like crap and you don't even want to get up. If you make it downstairs and heat up a bowl of soup, you're winning today, girl. Like, that's what you need to do. Get those people on board.
Yeah.
Get your groceries delivered, like whatever it takes.
I was going to say, that's the next $1 million idea right there, is the online meal service.
Yeah.
That's all AIP compliant.
Yep.
That's it right there.
If anybody's listening to us, that idea has legs.
Just have it shipped right to your door. 7 dinners, 7. So once people become compliant, because there's so much variability in terms of how quickly, like we just talked about, how quickly that can happen. Cold turkey, slow, extra slow, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Once people become compliant, how important is it to remain compliant 100% for 30 days? Or does it really matter if there's an occasional slip, within that process?
So listen, perfection, I tell this to my group members all the time. I've been running my SAD to AIP and 6 program. This is my 5th year, like almost 2,000 people have been through that program. I tell people all the time, perfection is not only not attainable, it's not even desirable. Like if you get perfection, you will be so miserable, thrown into such a tiny box that you have to operate in. You won't even get to enjoy your life. Like those perfect results won't actually bring you very much joy, because getting them was so miserable, you know? So I think the thing to do is, if you have some slip ups, or, you know, whether they're intentional or unintentional, don't beat yourself up, get right back on the horse, figure out what you might have learned from that slip up. You know, sometimes, like, you know, maybe I'll have a group member who's doing well for a while, and then they go out and they eat a piece of pizza, and then they feel terrible the next day. Actually, that's really valuable data. Now they have proof that something about that pizza, or a combination of things in that pizza, made them feel terrible. And it's not the best thing for their body. They heard their body communicate loud and clear. And that's really powerful information. So try to focus on what you gained from it. And then, you know, try to put in the work. The closer you can get to a really clean, strict, at least 30 days, the point of that is not to make yourself totally miserable and see if you can white knuckle it through it. The point is that on the other side, once you start the reintroduction process, it's just going to be so much more clear what works and what doesn't. And you're going to be able to gain the information that you wanted from the process in the first place.
Yeah. So really have grace on yourself. But the whole point through the process is to listen to your body. So if you have an opportunity to do that, that's a
right.
good thing. Yeah. And I think too, that really, it helps internalize it.
Yeah.
I know when my son was—
Know your why.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, I ran through this protocol with my son, not the AIP protocol, but working on some gut stuff with him. And so we were really trying to be stricter about sugar and things like that. And he had this major slip up. And I mean, kid ate like an entire bag of candy that he found and, you know, felt miserable from it. And, but that actually really worked in our favor, because then he really correlated and internalized it. And so then he was much more willing to participate in
the motivation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, actually, that's a great segue to one of my questions. Let's talk about sugar cravings, because one of the biggest things I think when people shift to something so restrictive, I mean, you even mentioned chocolate. Normally, like, dark chocolate is the healthy snack that people can go to when they're on a diet, right? So what tips do you have for sugar cravings, particularly in the beginning, but managing it throughout that new lifestyle transition to kind of keep it going?
Yeah. So there's a lot behind those sugar cravings. I mean, on one level, sugar is addictive and it is a poison. I mean, that's just, you know, maybe—
let's just say it how it is.
Yeah, let's just call it like it is. It's addictive and it's poisonous. And, you know, especially kind of those insidious forms of sugar, like high fructose corn syrup, that are kind of hidden in everything these days, right? It can be really hard to adjust away from it. You know, so that you give yourself a little bit of like kindness there. It takes a little time to adjust away from that. And your body essentially has to learn how to become a new kind of energy burner. You know, you have to go from the kind of short-lived fuel of, basically, sugar is kind of like kerosene. It's just really fast form of energy for your body, and then it's gone. And your body has to kind of shift into being more of a fat burner, which is sort of like a log on your internal fire, a real slow burn and a real steady form of energy. And that takes a little bit of time, that process, for your body to kind of learn that and expect that. And the way to get there is consistency, you know, just consistently giving your body good, high quality proteins and fats so that it can learn how to do that, and avoiding the sugars. You know, the other thing is too, is to eat regularly, like eat at regular intervals. Don't skip meals, eat breakfast. You know, when you have like low blood sugar, you cannot out willpower your body's biology. Your body is like, oh my gosh, we are in an emergency situation. Your adrenals are like firing. They're like, you know, like danger, Will Robinson, you know, like your blood sugar is very low. We're going to die any minute, you know, and that will make you want to eat anything, including like a whole bag of candy or whatever, you know, a giant cookie, whatever, because that energy need is so strong and the signals you are getting from your body are demanding. So that's one of my biggest tips. You know, I see so many people who start the program and they haven't eaten breakfast in years, and they're wondering why they feel so terrible and want sugar so bad, you know? So those are kind of some baseline tips. I think after you get to like 30 to 60 days, if you're still having a really, really hard time getting over the hump and you haven't felt those sugar cravings start to ease, you might want to consider, a more serious program like maybe the 21-day sugar detox on top of what you're doing to help you kind of really dial in about that sugar.
Mm. What is your favorite snack?
Oh, geez. What is my favorite snack? I mean, it changes. Recently, I went to Iceland,
Oh,
which was
wow.
really
That
exciting.
sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was. It was really exciting and really fun. And I took some AIP legal wild Zora bars. They're kind of a protein bar,
Mm.
a little meat bar, and olives. And now I'm like way into that. I'm like, I like the fat from the olives, and I like the protein from the wild Zora, and the wild Zora flavors are really great. So I've been like stuck on that since I came back from Iceland.
Is that ZOAR? Is that
Zora?
Oh, ZORA? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, those anytime you can have something that's compliant, that's pre-made,
Yeah.
that's even better.
Yeah, that's really handy.
And there's more stuff like that coming out, which is so
Yeah.
nice because I think you started 10, 15 years ago, into this whole lifestyle and and I started eating the way we eat, well, partially the way we eat now, but about 5 years ago. And even in the past 5 years, it's been,
Oh, yeah.
it's huge. It's blowing up, I think that's so much thanks to social media and podcasts and cookbooks that people are, coming out with now. And it's just so much easier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Store, and it's like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, and to clarify, like I was starting to deal with the autoimmune disease about 10 to 15 years ago, but I started AIP 6 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So that's when I made that transition. And it has changed dramatically in that amount of time. Back then, what was my favorite snack? Half an avocado and some tuna and maybe a few slices of banana or something, throw a little carb in there, maybe a few chunks of baked sweet potato.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. So I told you this right before we started recording. One of my clients actually sent me a list of questions for you.
Let's see if we can help her.
She puts a little caveat. She goes, I'm sure you can answer some of these too, but I'm going to go ahead and ask just because, if she has this question, I'm sure a lot of other people do too. So
sure.
Let's see. Let's start with number one. Is it possible to tell if weight loss is from inflammation?
Gosh, you know what?
That's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I guess I have to be honest that I don't know for sure how you would kind of notice that. I do know that particularly with my Hashimoto's folks,
Mm-hmm.
they can feel really puffy and inflamed and have sometimes like a lot of like water weight basically. Mm-hmm. And as we go through the process, they can start to kind of, like their rings fit more easily, right, or their watch fits more easily, or, they might notice that the puffiness in their face starts to decrease some, so gosh, I don't know for sure.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I would say pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
If it's really rapid and it's also coming with you're feeling a lot better in terms of, you can almost feel inflammation. And it's like that, like you're saying, sort of that puffy sensation, and that's going away at the same time, and you're losing weight more rapidly than what you would think of as normal for fat loss.
Also,
it may be a combination.
I kind of associate the loss of inflammation also as feeling less tender. Mm-hmm. If you have spots on your body that are quite tender and you notice that starting to ease, that's a sign that inflammation is going down.
Yeah. And I would think too, if you were experiencing anything like joint pain and that's starting to eliminate, it's all correlated.
That's inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the foods that are gray areas like green beans? Is it make or break?
Well, when I first started the protocol, a lot of those gray area foods had not been kind of firmly evaluated yet by Sarah and her research. So for instance, when I started the protocol, vanilla was not excluded. Green beans and peas were not excluded. Nobody talked about black pepper at all, So actually, I started the protocol without having removed those foods. And I would say that probably not all of the gray area foods, but a lot of the gray area foods actually don't present that big of a problem for most folks. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some folks who might actually be quite sensitive to some of those foods, and they might need to eliminate them. You know, for instance, I definitely have had people over the years who struggle with black pepper, and it turns out to be quite a trigger for them. Some people are very sensitive to the legumes with edible pods like green beans. So I think that the safe way to go is eliminate initially, and they'll probably end up being very early and easy reintroductions.
Yeah, for most people, for sure. All right, her third question is,
okay.
What could still be causing some gas or bloating on AIP? Now, I actually know her testing results, so I can answer to that side of it, but let's just throw it into the general category here.
Okay, so it's gas and bloating that she's experiencing on AIP. Sure. Okay. A lot of folks with autoimmune disease, very many of them, end up having some additional gut issues, and a really common one is SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And the autoimmune protocol is very high in a group of foods called FODMAPs. FODMAPs are foods that have fermentable sugars in them. And typically they don't represent a problem for folks because those sugars are absorbed in the small intestine before they hit the large intestine, where you are supposed to have a larger bacterial population. But if you have bacteria overgrown into your small intestine where they don't really belong, sometimes those bacteria are like, yes, sugar rush, and they feast on that stuff and produce gas. They ferment it and produce gas that creates all these uncomfortable symptoms like bloating, for instance, like flatulence or burping, sometimes constipation or diarrhea or both.
It's a fun world when you got that going on.
Yes, it's a fun world. Walking around looking pregnant, burping and farting, like awesome, right?
Yeah.
So it is really common though, and if you find yourself suddenly having like a really big uptick in those kinds of symptoms after going onto the autoimmune protocol, that can be a potential issue. What I usually say to people who are going through that is to take like 3 days. Don't do it for a long time because it's really hard, and it's not a good idea to just do it indefinitely, but take like 3 days and try to eliminate the FODMAPs on top of AIP and see if you get relief. If those symptoms seem to be relieved, that's a really big sign that this might be SIBO and you need to go in and get some testing. But don't just remove FODMAPs indefinitely, because diet alone won't treat that SIBO, and you'll actually just end up starving your gut of good bacteria and all the nourishing things that are in those high FODMAP foods.
Right. Yeah. You can start getting into FODMAPs and low histamine and AIP. And when you start overlapping them for too long a period, you're going to wake up and be like, can I eat chicken today?
Yeah. Right.
It's ridiculous.
Definitely don't want to get yourself into that restricted corner. That's not healthy.
All right. If I am still having tension headaches, any potential reasons, and natural painkillers, since NSAIDs are supposed to be avoided.
So the tension headaches, I mean,
I love these questions.
Yeah.
She just banged these out too, literally like 30 seconds before we got on. I got this list and it was like super fast.
She must have had them burning in there.
She must have been ready.
The tension headaches, I mean, there could be so many sources, you know. Stress is the first thing that I think about, like how's stress management, what kind of sources of stress does she have in her life, are there any that she could potentially remove outright from her life, or find better ways to manage, you know, how much is she putting into that piece of the puzzle. Another source of tension headaches can be, you know, kind of our ergonomic setup, whether that's, you know, maybe she has a job where she's seated, maybe she has some long commutes where she has to sit in the car, whatever it is. Maybe it's a mattress that's not working for her, something like that. You know, it could be some kind of alignment type of issue that needs to be taken care of. If it's food related, I would suspect blood sugar still needs to be worked on a little bit. I see a lot of folks get tension headaches when they're having a lot of low blood sugar episodes.
Which could potentially, I feel like, be easy to do when you switch your diet, because you go from such high processed carbohydrate intake to what would generally be considered very low carb. So if you're not actually prioritizing eating those whole food carbs, you can go way too low too fast.
Yes, that is exactly right. Just because we don't eat high carbohydrate like a standard American diet, that does not mean that AIP is meant to be a low carbohydrate diet, but it is a very common mistake to accidentally go too low carb when you're first switching over, because you're kind of like, what do I replace all these grains and processed foods with, right? Well, you need to be eating sweet potatoes, and you need to be eating turnips and rutabagas, and like squash, trying all the veggies out there, and looking for veggie sources of carbohydrate. So that might be something to troubleshoot and see if she accidentally went too low carb. As far as the painkillers, white willow bark is one that's out there that a lot of folks use.
Do you ever use like curcumin?
Yeah, I was thinking about like kind of the anti-inflammatories, focusing really on anti-inflammatory foods, like really upping the fish, and get those omega-3s in there. That could be really helpful more in the long term. The curcumin might help some. That can be a little immune stimulating depending on the person. So you kind of got to watch that and decide if it's right for you or not. But some folks I know use like topical things like arnica. So all of that said, yes, you want to avoid NSAIDs, but if pain is becoming like an obstacle, you should treat the pain.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And every once in a while, the NSAIDs are a necessary evil, I guess you would say. And when you have everything else in check, you're really going to help calm the inflammation and heal any damage that's caused anyway. And so, there is definitely a time and place. I absolutely agree with that 100%. Sometimes you just need it because it'll knock it out in 30 minutes versus.
And, you got to think too, a lot of folks who are using NSAIDs are, eating a very not ideal standard American diet. They're probably not taking care of their health in many other ways. They may have a lot of other medications on board on top of it. And then the NSAIDs are just kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back. If you've mostly got everything dialed in and once a month or so, you need to use some NSAIDs to get over some extra heavy pain. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You're not failing.
Right. Yeah. You're okay. It's okay. What about heartburn on AIP?
So another thing that's pretty common for folks starting out with this protocol, folks with autoimmune disease in general, is that they may have actually low stomach acid. I know that heartburn feels like your stomach acid is too high, but it's probably more likely that it's low, and it's just in the wrong place. You're getting a little bit of backflow, and it's touching your esophagus where it does not belong, and it's your esophagus is not made for that, so it produces all this pain. The thing to do there might be to experiment a little bit, maybe with like herbal bitters or some kind of digestive aid before you eat, or trying like a little bit of ACV, apple cider vinegar, or a little bit of lemon juice and water, maybe 10 to 15 minutes before a meal, and see if that helps a little bit.
Yes, very much so. All very, very, very perfect ideas. All right, last two. Why limited fruit?
It's about fructose and the kind of inflammatory effects of sugar. Sugar is sugar is sugar. It doesn't really matter what form it comes in. Yes, fruit has a lot of other nutrients in it, so it makes it a little bit more valuable sugar, but it's still sugar. So trying to stay in that 10 to 20 grams a day of fructose is best. And you're
usually trying to balance your gut bugs too, and they just love sugar of any kind. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So try, and for some folks, the fruit can really fuel that sugar addiction and make it hard to get past it, so trying to limit that a little bit can be helpful. And some people are really like, they want to be extra careful sticklers about this and like get a chart and figure out what, how much is what and whatever. But what I just tell people is to generally stay within about 2 to 3 pieces of fruit a day. You're probably in the right zone if you're doing that.
Yeah. And I love berries so much because you feel like you're eating a lot. You eat like a pint, like a cup and a half, and it's so low sugar, but then you're getting all the other benefits too. And that's like an easy thing to do, I feel like. Okay, last question. sort of on the same line. I love this question. Why are honey and maple syrup okay, but things like agave nectar and stevia are not? I
So,
love this one.
yeah, agave nectar and stevia have been shown to have some hormonal impacts. They can kind of mess with our hormonal system, especially like think about it. When you switch out regular sugar for stevia or agave, are you eating a little bit or a lot? Like a lot of people are like baking whole treats with it
Right.
and, pouring it into their coffee every single day or into their tea every single day. You're actually consuming quite a bit. And at that level, that's likely to have a very big impact hormonally. And that can be a real issue.
Yeah.
And again, honey and maple, sugar is sugar is sugar. It doesn't matter what form it's in. You still want to be careful with how much you're consuming, but there are some additional kind of nutrient benefits. I kind of refer to them as nutrient sugars. There's something there that makes them a little bit more valuable than just like, spoonfuls of cane sugar or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so many benefits. I think there's actually like a cough remedy that you can make with honey and,
Yep.
all these different things.
Yep.
You can't just swallow sugar and help your cough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a little bit different.
Right.
And then you have like the different kinds of honey too, the raw honey and the manuka honey, and they all have their own little.
Yeah, they did. There's some other benefits there. There's some nutrients that show up in maple syrup. Molasses is kind of in this category too. There's, B vitamins and things in molasses. So, if you're going to choose some sugar, trying to choose something that has a little bit more value to it than the processed stuff or the, really hormonally disrupting stuff is probably worth it.
Yeah. So when you kind of get through this, you get through the reintroduction, you sort of find the lifestyle balance, what works, what doesn't work, how your body responds to different foods and how frequently you can bring them in. How often do you say, because an AIP dessert or a paleo dessert is still a treat?
Yeah.
So how often would you say, it is okay, I guess you'd say? I mean, I'm sure it's going to vary. Birthdays, holidays, once, twice a week. What do you kind of think in terms of splurging there?
I try not to be super prescriptive about some of these things. Like, I don't encourage finding charts and weighing and measuring your fructose consumption.
Right.
I don't encourage like measuring your food and, tracking obsessively, like kind of turning it into a numbers game. And the reason that I don't encourage that with my clients and inside my program is because it's not natural long-term. It's not sustainable long-term. We don't refer to our lives as a protocol.
Yeah.
And if you want it to become a lifestyle where you're consistently putting health first, it has to be done in a way that feels natural and sustainable. So with that in mind, with the treats, try to limit them, try to crowd them out by eating other nutrient dense foods so that you're not really craving them in the first place. I probably, actually over the summer, I've been pretty lax about cooking up big batch cooks or anything. So I haven't made a lot of treats over the summer, but generally when I'm doing big batch cooks, I'll maybe make one batch of treats that kind of can last throughout the week for my family and I. And, because that's like a little something extra that makes it feel sustainable and enjoyable, right? Definitely if you're having a special celebration, if it's your birthday, if it's your anniversary, Christmas Day, something like that, do something that makes it special and makes it sustainable for you. You don't have to stop enjoying life because you're on the autoimmune protocol. But if it's like you can't get through a day without a treat, you probably
maybe you should do it. Yeah, exactly. Don't make it an every night thing. Thank you so much. So let's talk really briefly. I'm just going to tell people, I met Angie through the AIP protocol coaching certification. You guys are launching that again. Is it January or February of next year of 2019?
We are opening enrollment December 26th of this year. Okay. Enrollment is usually open for about 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll be starting the course in the end of January. It's an 8-week course. We only run it once a year because there's at least 100 of you, and we teach it personally, and we want to make sure that everybody gets what they needed out of the course and that we're sending people out into the world who really feel well versed in it. So we limit it to just one time a year.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw this out there, you guys. Do you think you know a lot take this course. You're going to learn more. It's so incredibly informational and helpful. I mean, you have the science background. It goes really in depth into what autoimmunity is, the science behind it, what your immune system does and how it responds. It goes into why you choose to eat the foods you eat, why you avoid the foods you avoid. They also talk heavily about the coaching side and how to make it a lifestyle and how to, handle all these different situations. A lot of the stuff we talked about on the podcast today, they walk you through that through this course. So honestly, I mean, even if you're just someone struggling with autoimmunity yourself and you want more information on it, it's really, really incredible, the information.
Well, so we can't.
Oh, that's true. Actually, yeah.
It's a practitioner training.
I forgot about that. Sorry. Scratch that. Delete.
No, that's okay. For folks who are interested just on a personal level for their own personal journey, and they really are like kind of science geeks and they want to learn all that extra stuff. Sarah Ballantyne has a program for regular folks who want to learn that.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Coach is for folks who have some kind of a certification or license to work one-on-one individually with folks and can work in the nutrition realm.
Yes. And it will absolutely help you to do that exponentially more. And then if you want help to get through the autoimmune protocol yourself and you're trying to jump into that yourself as an autoimmune client, you have the SAD to AIP in 6, which is getting through the AIP protocol in 6 weeks. Is that right?
Right. So, so for the folks who are interested in certified coach training, AIP certified coach training, you can find that at aipcertified.com. For folks who want some help walking through the protocol, just, regular everyday folks who are trying to get there because it's a challenge, they can go to sad2toaip.com. That's where my program exists. And we take 6 weeks to very gently come to the full elimination phase and get you set up to be able to maintain that for at least another 30 days and learn how to do it and how to kind of get in a planning and preparation rhythm.
And get the support through it, which is
right.
So helpful.
Yeah, we have coaches. You're in a small group with other people that are doing this for the first time too. The enrollment is closed for 2018. We just started the last cycle of the year, but enrollment opens in December for January 2019.
Awesome. Is there anywhere else that people can connect with you on social media or find your books?
Yeah. They can pretty much find everything, all the social media, all the blog articles, all the recipes, like 300 recipes or something at this point, our podcast and our books, our programs, everything at our website, autoimmunewellness.com. You'll find our social media there. You can connect with us, check us out on Instagram or Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources on their side. Check that out for sure.
We've had 6 years of nonstop. There's a lot of resources there, guys.
Thank you so much, Angie, for just sharing your story and for doing what you do and for helping the autoimmune community. You've made such a tremendous impact. And thank you for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.